No woman should ever have to have maintenance sex with her husband, says Pragya Agrawal, a doctor who decided to write this article in The Independent. And
Hang on, what's maintenance sex?
Well, I'll tell you in a minute. So she is a behavioral and data scientist, author, speaker, and founder of the research think tank, the 50% Project. I assume that means 50% being women. That's not accurate. Women are 51%. Women are the majority. I'm being oppressed. Stop oppressing me.
My fellow minorities.
Exactly. I'm now a minority, and she has a book, of course, out as well. And so she wrote this article for The Independent. I found this really hilarious because, I mean, just look at this tagline here. The very idea of maintenance sex is based on the heteronormative idea of relationships, where male sexuality is epitomized by a higher sex drive in women where their impulses are beyond control. Lunatic.
Hang on, is she saying
lunatic.
that because people are straight, they think that men have a higher sex drive than women?
Yes. Heteronormativity implies that men want more sex than women, and I would suggest that as a general rule, that's true, because it seems to be true.
The biology of the thing.
And this is where the concept of maintenance sex comes in. So maintenance sex is just when you have sex, even though you're not really in the mood, but your partner wants some intimacy, and so you go, okay, fine, we'll go to bed for a bit. And
okay,
then
right.
It's one of those things, and this was sparked because model Caprice Burette apparently recently advised women to lie back and have 5 minutes of regular sex to keep their relationships going, even when you're not in the mood.
It very much reminds me of the lie back and think of England.
Well, that's basically what she's saying. It's like, look, just your husband's looking for some affection. You might not be in the mood, but you're doing something for the person you love, even though you're not particularly in the mood that day, and that's a good thing to do because it keeps your relationship healthy, it keeps him happy, and that makes your life easier. This is a perfectly reasonable piece of advice for a woman to give other women.
Well, the reverse can also happen as well.
Well, I was going to get into that.
Sorry.
It's fine because you're exactly right. As if husbands never do things for their wives that they don't want to have to do. It's just that because of the general differences in attitude and intent between men and women, it turns out that men tend to want sex more than women when it comes to just on a daily basis, really. And women apparently are less in the mood in long-term relationships, and so it's maybe useful for the woman to be like, okay, well, I'll take one for the team, as it were, and that'll keep the relationship in good order. And so she says, speaking to OK Magazine, she said, women shouldn't say I'm tired or I have a headache, but instead, in fact, says take one for the team. Because it's 5 to 10 minutes of your life. See? Not a big deal.
Sorry, it just makes me think of the meme, the girl sat on the couch and the 5 guys behind her.
Well, that's not quite the same thing. But this really got our good doctor's goat, as it were. She says, call me naive, but I hadn't really heard of the term maintenance sex before, even though a quick Google search shows many articles filled with advice for women on how to strengthen their marriage by doing it once in a while to keep their partner happy, even when they don't feel like it. Such advice is always targeted at women, but never at men. It reinforces the idea that women's sexuality or desire is never placed on par with that of men's desires. But we're not really talking about that. We're talking about a need for sexual intimacy over the period of a long-term relationship. And again, who doesn't have to do things to keep their partners happy that they would rather not do? Like, I have to do the dishes. This is the only piece of actual housework that I do, but I have to do the dishes, and that keeps my wife happy. And so I've got to do the bare minimum every day.
I suppose the argument here is specifically for women. Mm-hmm. The reason this is different for them is because you've got to take something, right?
Yeah.
And this is
it's not different.
Emotionally different, let's say.
You think you think I ever feel in the mood to take my wife shopping?
Right, but
am I ever in the mood to? Oh, right. Do you want to spend an afternoon?
Surely sexual stuff is a little bit different than the unfortunate stuff you have to do just in practical life.
No, not really. It's about the thing that makes you feel cherished and loved by your partner, right? And so my wife feels cherished and loved when I take her shopping. So we spend a few hours shopping. I'll spend a couple £100 on her or something, and she feels that I love her and I care about her. And that's my labor. It's my physical labor that's gone into producing that money. So it's not very different in my opinion. And in the case of men, it tends to be that they'd like to have sex with their wives to show their intimacy, and that's what keeps the relationship moving on and keeps it in good order. And so that's perfectly normal.
Right.
It's totally normal. Like, I bet every grandmother has advised their daughters and granddaughters, you'll probably just have to do this. Just get on with it.
Sorry, I just can't imagine talking to grandparents about sex.
Every father has said to his son, look, you're just going to have to take your wife shopping. You're just going to have to deal with it. You know, if she starts complaining about something,
She's right, whatever she says.
Yeah, exactly. You know, if you need to fix something in the garden or something like that, just do it. You know, otherwise she'll whine at you and she'll be unhappy and she'll think you don't love her if you don't do these things. And that's the same thing with the reverse. The husband will think the wife doesn't really love him if she doesn't want to have sex with him, and that's true. You know, I think that is true for a lot of people. But anyway, yeah, she complains that heteronormative sex is mating sex is based on heteronormative ideas, and then she says the notion that men and women's sexuality and sex drive has an inherent biological difference, and that the woman's role is to lie back and be passive while the men are go-getters is seeped into our medical and biological textbooks. I wonder how it got there. Did it get there because that tends to be the kind of behaviors that human beings exhibit because there are biological differences between men and women?
Nah, some misogynists are the ones who wrote the textbooks.
That's right.
With an ideological agenda.
That's right. It was patriarchy that did this. But no one says that women have to lie back and be passive or anything.
But also the idea that maintenance sex can't exist in homosexual relationships there.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Homonormative ideas.
Well, that's a good point. You know, I imagine that there probably are. But, so yeah, basically, Chad, yes, there is a biological difference between men and women. And also, notice the framing, right? Because she's saying, "Oh, women are like, you know," the other woman's like, "Oh, well, you know, they even if they're not in the mood, or you know, just you know, do it because it makes your husband happy." So yeah, because there is a difference in the way that men and women become into, you know, get in the mood, right? You know, men, honestly, it's pretty much just a biological function that every day, you know, you've got like your biology's like, right, you haven't had sex today. Have you thought about that? You know, and it's like, oh, shut up. You know, I've got things to do. But for women, it's more about the sort of emotional state of affairs, right? And this is, I know I'm speaking in generalities, but I think that is something true.
That part I probably agree with. What I'm annoyed about is like she's a goddamn lunatic by the way she's framing this.
Yeah,
I thought she would be far more successful if you wanted to make this argument. I'm thinking of a chapter in Douglas Murray's The Madness of Crowds, where he speaks about the fact that there's a weirdness between men and women because women don't know what sex feels like for men and men don't know what it feels like for women.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, as a gay man, I've got two sides of the coin. And you could make an argument, I think, like Douglas probably would, or if he was going to take on this position, which is that sex is different in a physical way for women and emotional than it is for men.
Yes.
And the fundamental thing that has to be taken into account here is that if it's sex, like actual sex, then the person has to take a foreign object, and that's something more than just oral sex or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. But it's not even about that though. Like as you grow older, you realize that a lot of sex for women is about emotional climaxing, as in this is what romance is about, right? So a woman would rather be romanced and then have sex because then she's in the mood and she's been treated as like the object of adoration and desire, of the sole object of a person's affections, right? Whereas for men, it is, I think, a lot more mechanical. You know, where the men, I mean, don't get me wrong,
put the different types of pornography for either side.
Exactly.
Prove that.
Look at the desires. Look at the books that men will just watch a porn movie for 5 minutes, whack off, and then go back to playing games or whatever they're doing. But women will read a romance novel, you know, and things like this. And so it's just like there is definitely.
Do they whack off to those?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they do. Well,
well, 50 Shades of Grey, yeah.
I mean, what way? No, they just read them clinically and like, oh, that was very, very well written, E.L. James. I've actually read a bit of 50 Shades of Grey. It's not well written, so it's obvious that this is porn wanking material. But the point is that nature has endowed us differently, and that means that we have different needs. And I do think for men it is a bit more mechanical. There is obviously an emotional aspect to it, blah, blah, blah. But when it's, you've been married to 30 years, it's a lot less about the romance. But that's why women, I think, become less interested in sex over time, because the romance isn't there and they want to be romanced. And men, if you want to make sure that your wife is in the mood, you do have to be romantic. And I say this as someone who isn't very romantic. Sorry, darling, by the way. But yeah, no, this is a real thing, and she's complaining that it's heteronormative, and it's like, no, it's real, and you just have to get used to it. And
it's not unique to heteros.
No, not at all. But telling young people, young women, that they don't have to do these things, well, what you're doing is saying they don't really have to be givers in their own relationship. And so the man will be giving a lot of himself, and what she's saying is that women, when called upon to give themselves, they actually shouldn't. And it's like, it's not really fair, and I don't think that's actually conducive to a good relationship. But anyway, she has a really bizarre argument for this, right? So she starts talking about fertility. It's like, that's not what this is about. at all. And that's not what this model was talking about. You know, Caprice is like, look, just take one for the team. It's 5 minutes of your life and your relationship will be better. And she's like, oh, but men on the other hand are the go-getters who make the important decisions in a relationship, penetrating and entering, being aggressive, determined and assertive. Yeah, you know, those things that get women turned on. Which they do. The imbalance in treatment with not enough discussion of female infertility and sexual arousal also creates the impression that the male reproductive system is more interesting or complex. What are you talking about? Who thinks that?
I'm not even following. What?
I have no idea, but she's talking about like fertility and the male reproductive system is more interesting or complex. What blithering nonsense is this? It's nothing to do with the subject. And then she has a couple of paragraphs that I'm going to summarize where she's like, the misrepresentation in these scientific textbooks bolsters the illusion that female sexuality is only for the purposes of reproduction. The hell are you wittering about?
The biological textbook talks about birth giving.
Yes.
And the production of babies.
Yes.
And not the sensual feeling of sex. Yeah, weird that.
Yeah, and the sort of, you know, romantic aspect of relationships. But I mean, look.
Almost because it's a biology textbook.
Yes, Matt. Yeah, but why is she bringing that up?
I know.
Like she says, there are sections in textbooks on male arousal, since erection and ejaculation are primary facilitators for the act of fertilization. Yeah, but that's not what we're talking about at all. I mean, like this, you know, what the model was talking about was not reproduction for the purpose, sex for the purpose of reproduction. They're talking about having sex for the purpose of intimacy and maintenance of your relationship. And so, like, bring up, in these textbooks, the male orgasm is discussed and women's orgasms are not discussed. What are you talking about? This is not relevant at all. And frankly, it feels like a massive cope because maybe you're not satisfying your husband. Ha ha ha. While these ideas trap women into believing they should always have a lower sex drive than men, it also traps men into believing that sex for them is devoid of intimacy. What are you talking about? The men are literally looking for intimacy when they want to have, you know, when they're asking for what this woman would consider maintenance sex. It's the man's desire for intimacy.
The hell else could they be asking for?
I don't know.
Food?
I don't know, but she's a lunatic. She's like talking about absolute nonsense. But I love this. This creates a performative imbalance in relationships where men and women try to conform to certain societal ideas of femininity and masculinity without giving priority to space to what their feelings and desires actually are. Okay, how about this? The man is feeling like he hasn't had sex with his wife in a while and he'd like to have some intimacy. That's his desire. And the advice from the model is, yeah, you should probably do that because otherwise he's going to feel like you don't love him.
But also the absurdity of being like, well, this almost makes men feel like they should be masculine and women feel that they should be feminine. What's wrong with that? What you socialist every damn time.
Yeah, but it gets worse, right? This also creates a space and validation for sexual abuse and rape in long-term partnerships and marriage. Thank you for wandering way off the reservation, because that's not what we were talking about at all.
I assume it's like when the woman doesn't want to do it and then the man's just like, you have to. Like I've seen some, let's say, memory TV quotes from the Islamic world.
Right. Okay. Well, we're not talking about the Islamic world.
Because that's the thing. That's what she's talking about, presumably.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, maybe she's expanding it to that. But like in the English-speaking world, that's not what this is about at all.
It's illegal.
No, it's not legal.
No, it is illegal.
Oh, in the Islamic world.
No, it's illegal to pressure someone into having sex.
Oh, yeah, of course.
In a way like that.
Yeah. But again, that's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a person's desire for intimacy and validation, and through and for men that often happens through sex, and for women, even if they're not in the mood, a lot of the time they'll be like, okay, because they want to make their husbands happy. And the same way that I have to take my wife shopping, and I go, yes, darling, we'll go shopping this Saturday. I can't wait to wander around and buy you a bunch of stuff. That sounds so much fun, and yet I do it anyway. I was raped, is what we're saying here. Okay, my wallet was raped. She didn't consider my feelings about this. But yeah, so bringing up sexual abuse and rape, that's not what anyone's talking about here at all, right? Marital sex is not anyone's right. Okay.
Sure.
But it is an expectation and frankly an obligation that the person you're married to is going to have sex with you.
Wasn't her name rather Indian?
Yes.
I am wondering if she's thinking of the Islamic world.
Well, I'm wondering, maybe in India it's a bit patriarchal as well.
That as well, but the Islamic texts on this are quite clear.
Oh, yeah, well, absolutely. For anyone who's wondering, a wife actually doesn't have any right to refuse her husband under Islam.
Wives? Anyway,
yeah, so we're about to go through the Shahada with you. So she says, shocking statistics from YouGov survey have found that a quarter of British people do not view non-consensual sex within marriage and rape. as rape. Okay, that's interesting. Where did they come from? Because I think when we see the next survey, the next census, it's going to be that probably more than a quarter of the country will be of immigrant descent. Just saying, I wonder if there's a correlation there.
It's already over half in 2010/11 in London. So
yeah. So 4,000 people. Who knows what the ethnic breakdown of that survey was? But anyway, yeah. So, but more than a third of over 65s do not consider marital sex forced, even though marital rape has been illegal for more than 30 years. But is that what we're talking about? Because I don't think that's what we're talking about. I think that what this model was saying was, look, just if your husband's like, I'm in the mood, darling, and you say no, he's going to feel bad, and so it's going to damage your relationship. So you might want to say yes. We're not saying if you're being pinned down by your husband and he rapes you, just to accept it. That's not what anyone's saying.
These are different things.
Yeah, very different things. Very different emotional states that people are in when these things are happening. Don't know why you brought it up. But anyway, she finishes with this. It seems to me that there's a very outdated idea of gender roles and something that should have been left behind in the Middle Ages. Yeah, that can happen. Where women and men had very distinct roles. Men as active beings dominant and forging ahead in the public domain, while women's role was very much confined to keeping her husband happy and echo his emotions and sentiments. These ideas have no place in our modern society. Right, okay. Point one. That is a dramatically caricatured view of what men and women's roles were in the Middle Ages. I bet for most people you'll find that they were basically the same as they are now. Just, women would prefer to deal with the house, but I imagine a lot of them worked. Men obviously worked, but would have done things around the house and things like that.
Well, we have a great example from the famine in China, actually, in which the women were forced into the communes, and because it was decided it was patriarchal for them to stay at home and do housework and look after the kids and instead do crafts to make money. So they were made to work the fields, and everyone was paid in work points, and weirdly, strong men worked harder.
Wow, that's incredible. I can't believe it.
They got more work points and a lot of the women got less.
Really? Wow. It's
pay
amazing.
gap, huh?
Yeah, a patriarchal pay gap, even in a communist country. Weird. But yeah, anyway, the point is, right, it's a man's role to keep his wife happy too, just as like it's a woman's role to keep her husband happy. There will always have a place in this way. This will always be the case because men and women are different and will always be different. Training women that they owe their husbands nothing is as bad as training the husbands they owe their wives nothing. That's terrible. That's not a recipe for good marriages. It's a recipe for terrible marriages. And it's not like things are going great for marriage at the moment anyway, as marriage rates are plummeting. So don't take this woman's advice. If you think your husband needs a bit of tender loving care, give him it. And if you think your wife needs a shopping trip because she's feeling depressed, you should probably give her that too.
It could also happen with sex, I want to mention. It could happen that the man doesn't want to, but the woman does, and therefore...
And you should probably just, take one for the team. If you enjoyed this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can watch the full broadcast live every weekday at 1 p.m. UK time on lotuseaters.com.